Thanks again to the OpenFin team, Mitra and Mazi. This is my third time presenting at FinJ. We planned that. It's comic relief. Like I was saying, it's my third time at FinJS. I love this event. It's very rare to meet people outside of Silicon Valley doing JavaScript in financial services, so it's really cool. I am Joe McCann, the CEO and founder of NodeSource. I have been involved with JavaScript since it was embarrassing to admit that. I've been involved with Node.js from the very beginning in late 2009. But before I was a CEO and chief janitor at NodeSource, I was actually a trader. So many, many years ago, I was a trader. I worked on a desk on the street trading equities. And we chased anything that was volatile, like most day trading desks. But the skill that we learned was tape reading. We didn't actually physically read a printout like that, but if you know what I mean by reading the tape, we would look for patterns that existed inside the tape and trade against those. And yet here I am many years later running an open source enterprise company because of some patterns that started to kind of unfold when Node.js first came out. But the pattern was defined by this technology, Java. I think everyone here is familiar with Java in some capacity. Over the past 20 plus years, it has permeated seemingly every technological touch point possible. For better or worse, they attempted to go in the browser with JavaFX. There are still some Java Swing apps out there. Android is powered by Java, which is billions of devices around the world. Every Blu-ray player, point-of-sale systems, television sets, etc., they're all powered by Java. And of course, web servers and APIs, Java lives in that space as well. And they dominated this for many years. And then something changed in the spring of 2009. We started to see JavaScript expand way beyond just typical websites and web pages. We had Appcelerator's Titanium desktop. I don't know if anyone remembers this, but this is a way, one guy, of course Mazi, it's a way to build native desktop apps using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Arguably way ahead of its time, but there was an attempt to move JavaScript beyond just the browser. There's also a project called Phonegap, which enables you to build native mobile applications with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. In fact, 1 out of every 4 apps on the iOS App Store today is actually a Phonegap or Cordova app. And everyone in this room hopefully is aware of jQuery, and it solved a lot of our cross-browser incompatibility issues. However, these were mainly improvements for the user interface. Only a few months later, that changed. In the fall of 2009, and yes, this is the original logo of Node.js. It has definitely changed since then. Node.js hit the scene. Ryan Dahl presented at a conference in Berlin called JSConf, received a standing ovation, the first ever, I think, and it's been that way ever since for JSConf, because he was able to effectively create JavaScript on the server. And what Node actually is a combination of a JavaScript virtual machine, V8, which is the VM that powers Google Chrome, an event loop, and a low-level I/O API. Or to think about it in a better diagram or schematic, the code you write when you write a Node app is basically this JavaScript bridge to lower-level APIs. Remember, this is the same thing that happened with Phonegap and Titanium desktop, etc. But Node seemed to take off, mainly because it connected the ease of a scripting language, JavaScript, with the power of Unix network programming. What that meant was we just opened up Node.js to this massive audience of web developers, effectively the entire web development community. And since then, it's been pretty successful. It is, in fact, the fastest growing open source project in the world. More than a third of all software developers on the planet at the end of 2016 are Node developers. They use Node in some capacity. The Linux Foundation announced back in June of this year that at the end of this year, 2017, there will be more Node developers than Java developers on Earth. Let me repeat that. There will be more Node developers, whether we like it or not, than Java developers coming into the first quarter of 2018. NPM, as someone already mentioned previously, it's the fastest growing package repository in the history of programming. There's over 500,000 packages, over 1 billion downloads a week. This is just an order of magnitude larger than seemingly any other package manager or repository in history. And the investment community, who loves open source, also really loves Node.js. In fact, the investment community sees Node.js as more valuable from a commercial standpoint than Docker, than Hadoop, than Spark, than MongoDB, than Elastic. So there's a lot of energy behind Node.js, but what is actually driving all of this growth? Well, you see a pattern here? How meta of me, right? Node is now touching every single technological endpoint, just like Java did 20 plus years ago. So you have Node being the fastest growing workload on every major cloud provider today. So GCP, Azure, AWS, IBM, et cetera. There are multiple ways of generating and managing APIs with Node. Every major front-end technology, React, Angular, you name it, Gulp, Grunt, et cetera, are all using Node.js. Microsoft, and this is in 2017, amazingly, Microsoft now has Node.js running on iOS, which put that together even a few years ago, and no one ever thought that was possible. And Node is actually also running on every major IoT and embedded devices, so you can see Node running in LG television sets. You see it if you're if you live in the UK and you're a Sky Cable News or cable subscriber, the set-top box actually is powered by Node.js. Intel, Qualcomm, ARM, Samsung, they're all using Node.js natively on their IoT devices. And then finally, thing that I think most people are familiar with is Node.js on the desktop. The latest Skype client at Microsoft is an Electron app using Node.js. Slack, Spotify, et cetera, all of these applications are using Node in some capacity. So hopefully you see the pattern that I saw early on here is that there is this sort of sea change event happening with Java into JavaScript, particularly with Node.js acting as a vehicle for bringing JavaScript to the enterprise. And that's why we exist. We at NodeSource are seeing this pattern sort of emerge in front of us and want to make sure that we can serve the needs of folks that want to use Node.js effectively. We lead the open source project, and we are the only commercial pure play vendor. We know this stuff inside and out, and we've built a suite of products and services to address those needs. We are seen kind of as the commercial entity from the market around Node.js. We didn't pay Chris to say this. Here are a handful of our customers. We work with Fortune 500s. We don't sell typically to startups because they eventually run out of money. We work with people with real budgets that are doing real things with Node.js. And in working with all of these customers, we've noticed some patterns, especially in the financial services space. And I want to go over a few of these now. You may have heard of some of these or are familiar with some of these concepts. But the one that really stands out the most is this front-end, back-end pattern. And those are big air quotes because what does that even mean? So imagine you have an application that's powered on the back end by .NET or Java, and the front end is, well, it's HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And your 4X team says, I need a new charting widget today. We've got this thing happening, et cetera, et cetera. Well, now what do you got to do? You got to go to the Java team or the .NET team and say, hey, I need this, JSON payload. You got to generate some stuff, whatever. I need new assets for my front end application. They're like, yeah, we're busy. We have stuff to do. So what happens? You create a Node.js service or sort of a middleware layer in between that to serve your front end the assets it needs, where that back end Node application can actually communicate to that legacy system. We see this over and over and over again. And what it's led to is a huge spike in productivity in terms of actually delivering new experiences for your customers, whether they're internal or external. We also see, of course, people building full-blown services and APIs with Node.js because it is dead simple to create services and APIs with JavaScript. In fact, for Node, you can have a fully functioning web server in 5 lines of JavaScript. There's no Apache config, no Nginx config, no other sort of hoops to jump through, no application server to string up. It's 5 lines of JavaScript. Something that probably everyone in this room is familiar with is Gulp, Grunt, Webpack, Babel. They all use Node.js. So we see this everywhere in financial services with folks that are bundling up their applications. That's all being powered by Node as well. And there's a desire for some sort of standardization or enterprise version of a build system that NodeSource is investigating now. And of course, desktop apps with folks like OpenFin and the Electron project. Brave, for example, is using Node.js and web technologies to build native desktop apps. We see this all over the place in financial services and investment banking. So a few success stories in the financial services space. No surprise, can't really talk about most of them. You guys like to keep all your stuff secret. Hopefully we can change that at some day. Probably not. But there are a few that are public that we can talk about that are very, very real. And the first one is Mastercard. So a lot of folks come to me and they say, yeah, Joe, JavaScript, it's not serious. You can't build anything mission critical with it. Mastercard built their crypto signing service for digital payments with Node, meaning anytime you use Apple Pay, Samsung Pay, or Android Pay, it hits a Node service. They're doing 200 million transactions a month on top of Node. In fact, they've had so much success with this that they're actually starting to grow Node, its footprint inside Mastercard, creating a center of excellence around Node. This thing is getting really, really big in a place like Mastercard. So if you don't think mission critical with Node, just remember this one thing from this talk. PayPal is sort of the canonical example of success with Node.js. They had, I don't know if any of you were using PayPal in the early days or even just a few years ago, but man, that experience left a lot to be desired. There was some serious improvements needed. And they use Node to power a lot of that. So they are actually able to drive new features and capabilities into the experience because they were actually able to move faster with Node.js. And today, and it has been this way for quite some time, 100% of all traffic, not just web, at PayPal uses Node.js. And Capital One is a unique sort of example because they have really pushed the envelope in terms of being technologically progressive. They attract a lot of top talent because they use bleeding edge technologies and they sort of adopt a very, dare I say it, Silicon Valley approach to product development, but they still have a bunch of legacy stuff like every other company that's been around for a while. So this team stitched together 3 versions of their enterprise API for their front end teams or their UI teams to have one common contract or one common API that enabled them to actually move infinitely faster than trying to muddle through a bunch of different API versions, so to speak. So what's the most compelling reason then to actually use Node? Well, I would say in a word, it's agility. Now in financial services, people want to move fast, and then you have things like Dodd-Frank and MiFID II and Sarbanes-Oxley and all these other things that are kind of pressing against this, right? But with the right tools and processes and sort of expertise, you can actually adopt that path to agility rather easily. You know, NodeSource, we're the Node company. We know Node inside and out. We provide a couple of products around Node.js and NPM. We enterpriseify them, if you will. We have a product called NSolid and another one called NodeSource Certified Modules. These are geared for folks in highly regulated industries that need to be compliant, secure, highly available, reliable. So for example, NSolid, our product, is Node.js. You don't have to, if you have a Node.js app today, you don't modify a single line of code, and you get all of these additional capabilities and features. Majority of these capabilities and features will never land in the open source project. Why? Because we tried. we run a lot of the project's product roadmap, and what we realized is that the demands for the enterprise won't happen in the open source project. So we put them into our commercial product. And these have been driven by the demands of folks like you in this room and other folks in highly regulated industries or large enterprise customers. NCM, or NodeSource Certified Modules, same thing. NPM has over 500,000 packages. That's great. It's also terrifying. More than 20% of them have a known security vulnerability. So if you're using NPM today, you have known security vulnerabilities in your packages inside your systems. I'm not trying to scare you, I'm trying to inform you. We also have a solution for that. Now, you can go through and use a bunch of other cobbled together solutions. We want to just make this turnkey for you and standardize, and that's one of the things that we've done with our product, NodeSource Certified Modules. And with that, thank you very much. I'm available to chat more. I tried to speed this up because we were running over on time, if you didn't notice, but I'm happy to talk a lot more downstairs with drinks. Thanks.